What is it that keeps you going when you're not feeling how you want to feel?
It's going to be a real cheesy answer, but I think it's acceptance. No, I don't feel the way I want to feel in that moment. Because I think a lot of the running around that we do and the kind of pits that we can fall into are caused by chasing a certain state of mind, a certain perfection or an ideal. I need to feel inspired to write. I need to feel a certain way to do something. And in my career in music, one thing that has taught me, I think life is the teacher here as well, of course, is that you can turn up with the best expectations, but things are going to be different. Things are always different than how you imagine them, because it's just an imagined thought. So I think acceptance is kind of acceptance and kindness. It's kind of just that kind of, okay, it's not the way it is, but what can we do with how it is right now? And that always leads to kind of honouring what's actually going on, whether it's the band, the music, the limitation of gear, or how you might feel about your playing before the gig. I'm talking in a music context here, but I guess in a life context, that's a kind of a universal thing, which is easier said than done. But acceptance and kindness is the thing for me.
Yeah, I feel like when you, weirdly, an analogy that it doesn't feel too forced relating to guitar, is that like I have a few. I teach guitar. I just sort of teach a selection of my own like students, and the thing I always say to them is like that they'll be like beating themselves up about being stuck at like 80-90% speed of playing something or whatever, like not just quite being able to play it. And I'm like, okay, how fast can you play it perfectly? And then we'll go back and they'll be at like 30-40% in terms of actual perfection and really getting, like if you were to take that 30%, take it to 100, that's how you'd want it to sound, kind of thing. And actually just accepting, okay, I'm not actually where I thought I was necessarily, but just going, okay, well, that hasn't actually changed anything in my life. I'm still me. I'm still, everything I think I am, but I'm measuring it differently now. And then getting from that 40 to 50% is like way easier than getting from that difficult 80 that you weren't really doing anyway to 90%. It was never happening because you were never really, and that, I guess you could look at that kind of negatively and go, oh, well, does that mean everything I'm doing is worse than I think? It's like, no, I don't mean it like that. I mean, like, if you reevaluate where you're at and just go, okay, my life hasn't changed. I'm just measuring it differently now. I think that's something I've found has helped I don't know what your take is on that, but.
Well, it's, I resonate, and as a teacher myself, have come across that a lot. I think students, as a teacher, I'm a teacher-student, I don't really like the word, so I think it's more of a sharing of just somebody's played guitar a bit longer or done something a bit longer and they're just imparting that. And I think it's easy to think it's me doing all of this guitar playing, and especially when you're programming muscle memory, especially if you're talking about speed development here, as you're training a body to do something, it can only do what it can do in the time. You can't tell things to speed up. You can't tell time to speed up. And it's the same with teaching and, kind of any habit, any mental formation or physical formation. It kind of just becomes, it's about patience with that. And I guess the enemy that comes in, so-called enemy, is this enemy of comparison, of people thinking, well, I should be this way, or so-and-so, they might have a favourite player, or they're trying to get it to the original track, and they think, well, they're that. I should, they've in their mind, they think they just ought to be able to do that because somebody else can do that. When that's good. There's one aspect of that, which is the positive kind of like, okay, if you can do it, I can do it, but at the same time, there's also, the student is, they are the potential right there. No one else has been them at that time. They've got the fresh programming to do. They've got the new save file on the video game to to fill in, right? And you enjoy the game of playing by kind of exploring rather than trying to, auto complete everything as you go along in your practice. And I think that it's patience, and it's easier said than done. Again, all of this stuff it's just takes time, and letting the student know it takes time, but not on a kind of like, it's going to take you ages to do this because you have a certain ability, but just letting them know that, again, you're programming a body to learn all, the nervous system. Sounds very kind of woo-woo, but, human bodies are no different than trees and plants and everything else out in nature. You can't speed up a tree necessarily unless you give it some kind of supplement. I don't know anything about growing trees, but it's the same thing, right? It's that it can only go as fast as it can go.
Yeah, you start Sam's guitar steroids or something, or like whatever the equivalent is. Yeah, the thing I think the disconnect I still have, and I'm sure so many, if not almost all, well, probably people, but particularly musicians have, is that like everyone who's there, in inverted commas, or where you want to be, tells you to enjoy the process, and it's like I understand that that's important. Like I know that there's a lot of value in enjoying the journey there. It's such a cliche, isn't it? But it's because I guess it's true. But I struggle sometimes to sort of reconcile that difference of like, or I guess come to terms with just enjoying the journey. I think it's so much easier to look back and go, oh, I should have enjoyed that journey. Maybe. I mean, obviously, I'm not really in that. I'm 25. I've got hopefully a lot of journey to continue to sort of explore. But it's one of those things where I guess in hindsight, perhaps it's easier to look back. So I think from my perspective, and probably a lot of young people, it's difficult to like switch off that, I should be here, or I should be X, Y, and Z. I can't tell you the amount of times I look at players like, if you take someone like Tim Henson, like I think he might be younger than me, and he's like, the guitar hero of today sort of thing by a lot of people's measures. There's loads. I mean, you could name there's loads of other people like him doing, in their own way, doing something. And it's very easy to look at what they're doing, or like look at someone who was doing stadium tours at the age of 22 or whatever. So.
Well, there's several things. Sorry, just to interject here, because there's some. One of my main jobs is teaching guitar for Waterbury College of Music in Brighton. So there's some doing degrees, and there's lots of young students coming in there who are all inspired by Polyphia and John Mayer, and those two seem to be the main kind of sort of flag holders for the young guitar movement. It seems, at least where I am in my echo chamber, and they've got the same thing. They want to be ahead of where they are, and we all do. But you can't be anywhere but where you are, and you'll always be where you are. And I always ask them, like, what happens? What does it look like when you've completed guitar? And when they look at that, it's like, well, they don't want to cook. Nobody wants to cook. No one wants to finish the game. But they feel like they do. But it's an ongoing thing. You want to keep on exploring. The guitar teaches me something new every day, and I do get jealous, and I do get impatient of myself, but that's not why I started. It's not to get better than somebody else. It's to be the best version of myself. And the expectations are created by the expector, the one making the kind of the list of shoulds and shouldn'ts as you go along. And you can't. It comes back to acceptance and kindness to yourself. It's like, okay, I want to get better. I'm gonna push. I've got my goals. And also that thing of like, well, when you see somebody who's great, like Tim Henson, I got that. I'm 34 now, and as far as I've come, if I was to analyse my career now, where my shoulds were when I was 18, I was looking at Jason Becker and Paul Gilbert, and they were meant to be doing their big thing when they were 17 or whatever. In that remit, I must be a failure. But I'm not. I've got a career in music. I'm helping people. I'm writing music. I'm standing on my own 2 feet as a musician, and that's enough. Just being alive is enough with that sort of thing. But I think these are, you create the idol in your head. I want to be like Tim Henson. I should be this way, but you're not. You're who you are, and you're inspired by it. And I think it's that feeling of impatience is actually sometimes can be. I think people misinterpret that as a bad thing, but actually it could be just excitement. I'm excited to play. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to being able to play that well. If you change that, rather than I suck, I'm rubbish, I should be this way. This person's got this many Instagram followers. They can play this many notes. They've got this clean technique. And so, hold on. They're just an analog of what I could be in my own way. That's exciting.
I was reading. It's one of my New Year's resolutions is to read more. So I've nearly finished my first book of the year. I'm proud of that. But I was reading Atomic Habits by James Clear. I might as well give it, as if that needs a shout out. It's probably about the platform that he's got is probably a lot bigger than mine. But he's talking about the difference between saying I have to do something and I get to do something. It's a very different. It's kind of glass half full, glass half empty kind of difference, isn't it? Like it's like you can say I have to get better because I have to be as good as Tim Henson or whoever. I feel bad. I feel like I'm sort of Tim has become this like totemic kind of almost bad guy in this situation. But
well, he's awesome. He's awesome. He's incredible.
I've not really heard anyone play like him. So I guess it's a sort of very backwards compliment, isn't it? But instead you can say, oh well, you can see the opportunities of like watching yourself progress in your own way, which is again, I think the difficulty that I'm trying to the gap that I'm trying to bridge for me is that difference of like or that kind of allowing myself to understand that I should be enjoying. That's the thing I'm saying. I should be enjoying the process. Like I feel like I should be, and I am. But obviously there are days where I'm very much not. And I think it's something that a lot of people kind of go through. But go on. Sorry.
No, I think the question I often ask myself and other students as well who are feeling the same way. Myself, this is a daily question. Is it? I've got all my goals and aspirations to be better. Whatever that might be. Write better songs, improvise better, be able to play a certain artist's song, master theory, master certain aspects of guitar. All these kind of totemic kind of aspirations we all have as musicians, or play a certain gig. But what is it like just to be an ordinary guitar player? Like, actually, what is it okay? It's okay not to. There's lots of stuff that you can do already, probably, especially if you're aspiring to players like, I'm going to now say Rick Graham or Tom Quayle.
Let's give someone else a hard time.
Why can't, what about what I've got right now? I can still write music. I can still create something worthwhile without having to have this kind of, because what I'm hearing here, I'm probably hijacking this, but like, it's about technique and being faster, being better, having a better career, having the shiny thing, basically. But the shiny thing is somebody else's shiny thing. And you've got your own shiny kind of potentiality. And actually what you might take as ordinary is completely unique in somebody else's book. And it's kind of honouring, what have I got to bring? Everyone's got their own unique way of coming at the guitar, of music. And what is there to be developed? What can I stop doing? Rather than what can I add? What can I develop which I've already got? And that's the ordinariness of just being a guitar player. And actually, you probably find that the more you can be unexceptional and ordinary, you actually start to find that there are things that are really interesting that you can explore, and you start to feel, oh, this is kind of unique to me in my path. I really enjoy, one of the classic examples is Paul Gilbert talking about how he moved away from sweep picking when it was a big thing in the 80s, but he found it very difficult. And he started to reinvent how he played arpeggios on the fretboard and string skipping. And that's a very bold technical example, but I think that's a good example of how we kind of work to our strengths. We take from our weaknesses what we want to do, and we transform them into what we can do, and then we take it further with our imagination and our own unique perspective on those techniques.
Talking about Paul Gilbert, another one that came to my mind was Steve Vai. I think he talks about tapping and how, I think it was tapping, how he says he didn't really like it, but I can't remember if it was referring to himself or just whether he was talking about guitar sort of in principle, where he's saying there were certain techniques where he didn't really like them, and instead of forcing himself to learn them, he just said, well, I just don't want to, that's not me, so I'm not going to do it. And yeah, I mean, if you want to know, if you want tapping to be part of your sound, then yeah, you're going to have to go and do that. But if you feel like you're just learning it for the sake of it, and then you could take this further, you say, well, if you feel like you're just just kind of developing in a certain way as a player and as a musician because of X, Y, and Z other players that you want to copy, because you feel like you have to, you're just going to end up sounding like you think you should sound rather than. It's funny actually, because it was only yesterday I think I put out a little reel of Martin Miller talking about this kind of stuff, how he went down he sort of looked down the sort of fusion guitar sort of rabbit hole and thought like it's not really where he wanted to go. He thought it was, but he realised it wasn't quite what he thought it was going to be, and then obviously just realised, okay, I need to start singing. That was a big thing for him that I only discovered when I started looking into his stuff. So yeah, I don't know if you heard this, Steve. I don't know if I'm making that up. I know that you can confirm or deny that what I'm.
Yeah, Steve Vai says a lot of very wise things, of course, and I'm sure it sounds like something he would say, and it reminds me of something come up in my own path is the difference between learning from fear and learning from curiosity. Those are the standpoints. And as a young player myself, and still now, I mean, I think I'm talking from many years of playing. I wanted to be Guthrie Govan. I wanted to be able to play jazz. I wanted to do bebop. I wanted to do country. I wanted to be able to play 7/8 string guitar. I do, but do all the techniques, double thumbing like Tosin Abasi and all this stuff. I want to be able to play over all these changes. But then there's also like, well, what actually interests me? And I realized some of the things I was thinking I wanted to do were because I was feeling inadequate looking at other people play. You go through your Instagram, you do one scroll with your thumb, and you'll see the best neo soul, you see the best gent, you see all the fads of guitar going through, you see all the people with pre-composed solos doing all the techniques, and it's just like every technique in 30 seconds, and it's all amazing. The tone is amazing, the video is amazing. They seem to be really charismatic, cool people, and you start to feel like, whoa, I've got to do all of this, because it's like a fear thing. So I want to be cool as well, because you're feeling a way, and you kind of almost deep down there's this guilty kind of like, well, I want other people to feel that way about my playing. And then you start collecting all these techniques and styles like Pokemon. You kind of like catching them all, getting them all in the bag. Can you do all 150 techniques? Can you do all more at this tempo? I've met people, no names mentioned, but like they won't release music. They won't get on and make music until they can play a certain BPM. And they've written everything in Guitar Pro ready for the day that they can play. And I think that's an honourable thing, definitely. But it's a shame because, life's happening right now. And there's things you can be saying with your music. And it's always been those things, all the techniques that I've found I can do fairly confidently have been just from interest. We've all had it where you sit down to play guitar and you start to work on something and you're naturally just there for a few hours. Versus when it's like, oh, I've got to do this horrible thing. Okay, I put a timer on, I'm going to do 2 minutes. And I'd argue, obviously, there's certain things you do have to do. There is the woodshed, so to speak, but the woodshed needn't be prison. If you get your practice materials and your mindset straight of what you actually want to do and what you're actually interested in, what actually makes you excited about guitar. And that's something I have heard Steve Vai talk about a lot. You know, what makes you excited? What makes you curious? What makes you go, oh, how can I change that? And often it's the simplest stuff. It's not the 25 licks package of all the crazy, you know, altered dominant licks. It's often a very simple concept. They're a very simple 4-note phrase, which kind of ends up becoming, for me, in my personal experience, the thing which drops into my playing and piques my curiosity. It makes me love guitar and music more than the kind of big, heavy concepts that I need to be sort of, I don't know, putting microchips in my brain, so to speak, you know, forcing myself to eat it. Sorry, that was a long...
No, I love how I think the learning through fear versus learning through curiosity is a really good thing to acknowledge. You know, why are you learning? Yeah, it's an important question to ask yourself, I think. Like, I've definitely learnt stuff through, I don't know, maybe not fear is the word, although I'm sure I've been in that place, you know. I guess it's hard to call it learning through fear, because it's not when you're sat there, you're not like afraid,
no,
but it's
you don't think it's happening.
but it's that learning through inadequacy rather than through curiosity, and I think if you were to ask yourself, okay, what are the 5 things you're most curious to learn versus what are the 5 things you think you have to learn or that you're afraid to not know, like, there's a balance, because sometimes that fear, I think, can be a good thing, because it can just push you to go, you know what, yeah, I need this because it's going to make me better. There's that, but yeah, I really like that, actually. I think that's an important question for everyone to sort of ask themselves in a lot of respects. And I think some of the best lessons you can sort of take don't just apply to guitar, they apply to, or just music. You know, in theory, I think that applies to life. Like, you know, doing stuff out of curiosity is always going to help. But I mean, so you were talking about teaching at Water Bear, and something I was intrigued to ask was, because I mean, so I went to BIM Birmingham. When did I graduate? Maybe a couple of years ago. So I was in like their first cohort. So I'm not long out of that sort of system, as sort of on the other end, you know, that you are. And what I was intrigued to ask is, what do you think of the sort of the mindset that students go into music college with versus perhaps how do you see their mindset, full stop, is one question, you know, for better or worse, but then also how does that compare to you when you were of that sort of age? I don't know whether did you study at a music college sort of in the same way that the students that you now teach do? So
yeah, my history is that I started playing guitar when I was about 6 years old, you know, just playing Buddy Holly, like old 50s rock and roll. I was a bit of a strange kid for the time in the early 90s, obsessed with that sort of stuff. And it was a very fun, personal, enjoyable thing. It was my little world. Didn't know anything about guitar. I just there's a local guitar teacher, and he'd come over, we'd play Neil Young songs for an hour, and then that was it. I loved it, you know, and then Hendrix and things like that. And I didn't know what a pentatonic scale was. I didn't care. I did have a guitar teacher come and try and teach me the pentatonic when I was 8, and I went outside and played instead, because it was so cerebral. It was nothing to do with music in my mind at the time. You know, it wasn't, as a young child, I didn't understand. And my parents weren't necessarily musical, so they couldn't say, you should probably learn that, you know, that sort of thing. So fast forward to later on, I went to college when I was 17. I went to a local college here in Chichester, and I met loads of great players, and most of them are still in the industry playing. But they had a bit more training, so I got a bit of a blast of, you know, people playing Avenged Sevenfold, and I was introduced to Racer X and Yngwie Malmsteen and Vi and Larry Carlton and Lee Ritner, all these jazz fusion-y players as well, John Schofield. So I got a big mix of everything. A great guitar teacher there who was kind of like a Zen master in the way he taught. He was an old guy, but he'd done a lot of session work, and he had a very simple way of teaching. And then I went to BIM.
Oh, cool.
And that in Brighton. And that was in its early. I went there because I was promised Guthrie Govan, and apparently Guthrie had left at that time. And so when I talk about I say this always a preface to how I'm going to answer what you're saying with what do I think a student's mindsets now and my mindset when I was a student. So I can only talk from my own experience. And often when I see students come in, we only see through what we know. Our perception is based upon our own experience. And it's often a reflection of how we feel and how we felt. So I can see a lot of how I felt. And I also see, refreshingly, really positive mindsets, really driven students. And obviously one of the big changes between when I went to BIM and where it is now is you walk into a class now and I teach. What I'm teaching isn't the same as what I was getting taught necessarily all those years ago, because you come in, students have access to Instagram and YouTube and lesson packages. Their level, technically, is brilliant. You get students say, "Can you listen to my new song?" And rather than giving me on a CD and it's a bad demo done with like keyboard drums, they've actually got a full produced demo. It's mixed and it's probably on Spotify, and they've got a link and they've just airdropped to you. So it's kind of, the world is different. The technique is they're learning polyphia songs note for note. They don't have any questions about kind of attempting stuff, but most of it is this kind of thing of like this anxiety of what they should be working on because there's so much stuff. And there's also this massive comparison and fear of inadequacy and all that stuff. Now, going back to when I was at BIM, I don't think that's much different. I kind of went in there from a small town. I was one of the few guitar players of my age in that town. And you go into BIM and you're surrounded by people who are all the best guitar players in other towns, all thinking they're going to be the next whoever. So there's a big shock there. And I think classically, in my experience, it's the first term that kind of where people drop out very quickly because they realize either they don't want to do music, or they're doing it because this is an ego project, or they've got such an ego, like we all do, and they stick at it and they're tenacious. And that's what I did. I really thought I was going to be Jason Becker. I thought when I get to the other side of this, I'm going to be just as good as all my heroes and all that stuff. And some of that mindset helped, but I got through there in the most selfish, most painful way possible. And I think it damaged my relationship with guitar and music and other people. And it's still taken me, between BIM and where I am now. I thought I'd probably finished BIM when I was 21. I'm 34 now. Now I'm starting to get back how I felt when I was 6. That love and just pure, just like, I want to play with people. I want to make music with people. So where am I going with this? Do stop me, Joe, if I'm ranting.
I'm fully hooked. Carry on.
Okay. Well, I think that's the mindset of, when I went in there, my glass was full, right? So I had no opportunity to fill the glass of new and fresh water. It was full of my old dirty water. I was like, right, I've got my shrapnel shred artists. I want to be a shredder. And then as soon as there's a guy called Jim Williams, and he tried to make us all play to a click at 90 BPM, doing 2 and 4. One, that, just doing like a kind of Motown thing, and none of us could do it. And I went home and cried because in my head I was like, no, I'm the best shredder. I could play maybe a few riffs of Paul Gilbert and stuff. I really thought, that I was unique in the sense that I had something really, my technical ability was something that I can present the world. And actually it's not. It's, technique isn't shredding. Technique is being able to actually play consistently and actually say something with what I want to say. That's the big sort of lesson there. Everything should be a sort of servant to the music, to playing, to actually communicating. What I see nowadays is the equivalent of someone learning lots of Shakespeare and just saying it all the time. Every time there's a conversation, they just say Shakespeare. And you're going to get quite annoyed with that person after a while. It's going to have it might have a certain relevance, but you're going to soon you're going to meet people who can't speak that language as well, not understand it. It's not appropriate. It's not appropriate at McDonald's. It's not appropriate when a funeral, all these sort of situations in life. So how can I make my guitar playing more conversational, relationship based? So that's what I'm hearing. Sorry, to go back to the students, I think there's a lot more onus of people going, how can I work with my instrument to make what I want to make? That seems to be more forefront. Whereas when I was there, it was more, how good can I get to just melt people's faces, whether that's in jazz or shred. How can I just be a terrifying player? That seems to be the old school view. I think that's still there some ways, but I think people are starting to realise what I was saying earlier, is appreciating their unique ordinariness, being themselves. And that is actually the best gift you can give as a musician. So that seems to be what I'm seeing a lot more of.
Yeah, I like the whole conversational sort of, like shredding is great in the right place, in the right time. And even some of the best shredders will admit that like rhythm guitar is most of what you'll be doing a lot of the time, depends what kind of music you're doing. But and I quite like the analogy of the Shakespeare, how you kind of, there might be moments where that Shakespeare quote really is perfect for that conversation or that situation or whatever, but like a lot of the time, it's impressive, but there's a lot of things I think are impressive that I'm not that interested in hearing or having much to do with, and ultimately some of the, I remember studying English at school, and like I think the book that I really liked was Of Mice and Men, because it was just, it was far more relatable. Like, we read Shakespeare and that, and I kind of understood it. And I guess when we went into more detail in our, because I did AS level English, so I was 17, whatever, I was doing that. We studied The Tempest by Shakespeare, and I found that a little more interesting, because we actually, at that age, the teachers actually go into like the society and what the kind of wider conversations of Shakespeare were. But like, I remember just reading Of Mice and Men, and I found that far more impactful than Shakespeare. And that's not to demean Shakespearean stuff, but let's just call it Shakespearean stuff. Like, that's demeaning in itself, isn't it?
Well, it's very interesting. It's beautiful stuff, right? But if you just said to be in a conversation quoting Shakespeare, and coming back to music as the thing, it's a bit like when you learn a new lick and you go to the jam and try and play the lick, and it just doesn't, most of the time it doesn't work, or it just comes across stiff and inappropriate. And I think there's a lot of people myself included, have tried to sort of learn vocabulary on the guitar in order to impress and throw it into the situation. And there's a lot of that going on still on the old Instagram. It's lots of preset pieces, but then it leaves it's what it lacks. It's not the technicality that creates the separation of listener and performer. It's the lack of kind of the isness, the appropriateness of the situation. If you've read lots of Shakespeare in your life and then you're having a conversation, it's most likely that will come out naturally when it's appropriate. I'm not thinking about what I'm talking about now, but what comes out when it's ready. And if that's that quote, or that thing is there, then it will come out, so to speak. And I think that's an analogy of practice is to get things so subconsciously embedded that they come out in their own way, but you're also making it appropriate to the situation as well. Guthrie's a really good example of that. He can sort of move with the music, and he probably applies lots of techniques, and you could analyze him doing this and that, and he's doing this with this technique, and he's moving to this technique, and he's doing this arpeggio, he's superimposition, but that's not what he's thinking. It's just, for him, this is the sentence, this is the word, it's coming out in real time. And I think that's a goal we can all aspire to, is having that freedom with the instrument in a way that it is like a language.
Yeah, I think the ultimate point of language is communication, isn't it? Like I have a friend who, he's got a very good vocabulary, and I would joke about this with him. It's an old housemate of mine. Very good vocabulary. I consider mine to be pretty good, but his is like he would come out with words that words I knew, but I would never say. You know, there's a lot of guitarists that do the same thing, I think, compared to me. I know what they're doing, but I'm like, I would never do that. And you know, but anyway, we were having this kind of, I wouldn't call it an argument, but like, you know, a sort of discussion of like he was saying he finds it frustrating. Sort of, he was half joking. He was sort of being a bit pretentious as a sort of in a sort of jokey way, saying, "Oh, it's so annoying when people don't sort of, you know, he tries to speak how he naturally does, and people wouldn't understand him or they wouldn't get the point that he's making." And I'd say, well, you do use a lot of fancy words, you know. Like, I understand them. I maybe don't use them, but I do know what you mean. And you go, well, people should just read then, or whatever, you know. And he's not that stuck up. He was just sort of joking, but he was half joking. I was like, well, the whole point of language is to communicate. And if the person that you're communicating with doesn't know what you're saying, in other words, if you're trying to communicate something emotional in music to someone at the other end, if they're not educated in jazz music, you're effectively communicating almost nothing to them. Whereas if you're sat in front of a jazz audience, or I suppose this example would be maybe a Shakespearean crowd, you can maybe get away with, it depends who you want to communicate with, but I still stick with the point that like he insisted that he was communicating the best way, when actually I don't think he was. He had superior, inverted commas, communication skills in some ways, but then he wasn't communicating those ideas. He actually, ironically, his thoughts weren't being communicated anywhere near as well as maybe mine were, because he wasn't willing to sort of adjust his like message. I don't quite know if this analogy lines up perfectly the more I talk about it.
Well, it kind of does though. I mean? It's like going to the blues jam and then suddenly doing it. I don't know. I mean, it's funny. It's also, it can be quite funny, right? It's a bit, you're doing a blues jam and you're doing an Ingve lick or something, or some crazy altered lick over the 5 chord or whatever. And it can, for the musicians, it's like, whoa, and then people laugh, and there's that kind of wink, wink, nod, nod kind of aspect of it. But there's also, you know, what coming across as a pretentious so-and-so in the situation as well. I don't know. It's all back down to what your vision is with music, I guess.
Yeah. What have you? I was sort of doing the old peruse of Instagram and all of them. I saw you sort of posted something about, I guess, just sort of progression and a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. And you had a quick mention of sort of things like burnout and sort of that. You're talking now about how you're starting to feel the same way you did when you were 6 years old. You know, starting to rediscover that. But to put a sort of positive spin on it, what have been? How do you, in the moments that this is almost just kind of going back to your first question in some ways, if you feel burnt out, how do you go about sort of alleviating that sort of feeling of, I guess, fatigue for, you know, because I know that feeling where the passion hasn't gone, but I'm just like burnt out, even if I've not been doing much. Sometimes you just feel that burnout. How do you, what's your experience of it, and how do you then kind of get past it?
Well, the simple answer is going back to the first question you asked me, which is that acceptance and general goodwill, kindness towards yourself. Like, okay, it doesn't, you know, because you love. I know I get this with students as well. They get often quite overwhelmed, you know, at the end of the terms and stuff with all the performances coming up, and it's because there's so much guitar playing. It's so intensive. It's constant, and your whole world is just guitar. And it's okay to take a break. It's okay to take a week off if you can. You know, nothing's going to go away. I mean, technique might, you know, become a bit rusty maybe, but I doubt it. It's not going to change your world. Actually, it's going to give you some perspective. And actually, having a break is actually something you do because you love it, not because you're weak. I think some people see burnout or taking a break as even though the conversation is a bit more liberal nowadays, I do think still people have this kind of machoistic view of like, okay, I've got to push and graft, and if I burn out and stop, that means I'm weak. And it's like, well, it's weakness to kind of actually just go through it because you're insecure. Real strength is actually kind of the resilience of keeping the long game in mind. If you want to play music for life, you've got to take these breaks. I'm saying you, so I'm the metaphorical us, here. My experience of burnout has been because I've been playing since I was 6, and I've been told that I was very good. All of my life, I'm very lucky that I don't think I'm very good, but I'm saying I've had encouragement from people saying, that sounds great. You're the guitar player. People tell you who you are. People say you're the guitar player. You're the metal guy. Oh yeah, I did a lot of 8-string. I still do a lot of 8-string guitar. I love it. But I did a lot of 8-string guitar many years ago. People were like, "You're the 8-string guitar player." As soon as you do anything else, they, Instagram trolls and stuff. You get lots of nasty comments, and it sort of reinforces this thing of who we think we are is actually based upon what we think other people think we are. Ultimately, so there's this kind of guilt and lack of identity. If I don't play guitar, then I'm not valid. I remember going on a family holiday to Thailand. It was like a big special trip with all the family, really special trip. And I took a guitar with me, and I made sure I practiced for a couple of hours every day. And we're going over on this boat to this island, and I disassembled my guitar into this suitcase, and it was about to fall off the edge of the boat because it was quite choppy, and I was viscerally angry and upset that I might lose my guitar, but that I might not be able to practice. If that goes, what am I going to do? I completely missed the time with my friends and family, the time in Thailand, because I was so obsessed. And this is such a trivial thing, but I think we all do this. We miss out on the actuality of life and the quality of life. So it's dangerous. So I got to the point where I was so obsessed, and selfish and egotistical, even though I didn't think I was being egotistical. I was kind of imparting my suffering on other people, that I wasn't good enough at guitar and all this stuff. And I was screaming. I was doing these long drives to gigs, and I was screaming at myself in the car. I was kind of going off in my own way. And a lot of people have worse things happen, of course, but I got myself in quite a hole with it, quite a bad hole with it. And it was affecting my relationships. I could see that it was affecting my self-view. It was affecting my relationship with this guitar, this thing I've had since I was 6, which is a lovely thing to have in my life. It became this horrible kind of scary thing. So then a few of my friends kind of could see that I was being my own worst enemy, and they suggested I go and get some counselling. So I went to do that. And one thing I'm quite vocal about is that no matter how you feel, I heard Jack Gardner talking about his experience with going to CBT and things like that. And there's a kind of guilt, like I shouldn't go to therapy, nothing that traumatic's happened, But I think everyone should try it because you learn about yourself. There's one thing you should learn, all these shoulds and shouldn'ts of learning guitar. You should learn about your mind. It is because that is where everything happens. Everything happens there. Your perception, your only perception of the world happens right here. Your thoughts and your ability to see and not control your thoughts, because you can't control your thoughts, but the ability to kind of understand yourself is a superpower. And it's obviously, again, it's a journey. But I'd say I've come to this view of acceptance and kindness through counselling, through my own exploration. I've done this for, when I was quite young, I did Kung Fu for a couple of years, and a lot of mindset stuff came through there. And they taught us how to meditate that way. And I kind of left it, and then I came back to that in quite a major way through people like Sam Harris, who does a lot of talking on meditation and science. And all this stuff people call woo-woo, is actually, there's a lot in it that is very useful. And I often find it's the most rational, skeptical people who often probably need a bit of woo-woo in their lives just to kind of balance it out, because a lot of the suffering comes from, this kind of like tense mindset of I should be this way, it has to be this way, it has to be hard facts, it has to be kind of right here in front of me. But it's actually, can you just let go of all that for a moment? Stop becoming and just like be like you're alive. guitar is just an invention of the human mind. Like there's no, it's, you're not a heart surgeon, it's not life and death. So taking a break is so important. And I'm happy to unpack any of those subjects I'm going over now, but that's where I've come at, with this. It's okay to take a break when you're feeling the burnout. Stop. Like, look after guitar, look after your desire to play guitar, look after the people around you. Life is also the inspiration for making music. Your appreciation of what's around you, what your interests other than music are going to inspire your music. So sometimes taking a break is actually the best thing you can do.
Yeah, we can definitely relate to the sort of that. It's interesting, the sort of thing you say about I found that sort of whole thing you're saying about the Thailand experience interesting, because a lot of people have these little moments where, like, on the outside in, it doesn't seem like much, but it can trigger something that is quite significant to you. So I don't think it matters whether it's a small moment, or not. But what was I going to say? Yeah, I think there's a lot of points actually that I sort of I always get to the end of, whenever anyone makes a good point, I have about 4 or 5 questions that I could decide which of these different parallel universes I'm going to pursue in this next bit of conversation. But I listened to recently a podcast with Gabor Mate. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I'm fairly. I've listened to a few of his talks.
Yeah, and like he was, when you were talking about understanding your mind, and I do think it's something that we don't understand as well as we should. And I think I'm no scientist really, but I do think there is a bigger connection between mind and body than I think we actually are aware of. He talks about the thing he sort of, I don't want to say hypothesizes, because as far as I'm aware he cites a lot of reputable studies, but he talks about the relationship between stress and like childhood stress as well, and things like rheumatoid arthritis, and things you would think would never, like, why would that relate to stress? Why on earth would that have anything to do with it? But your brain ultimately has a lot of control over your nervous system. I know for example, I know if I'm anxious, I can't eat a thing. Like, I just cannot. I can't touch food, and that could go for a day or more, and I mean literally not eat a single thing. So I think if that anxiety can cause that in a short-term basis, what about over 10 years? Even like, say I'm 10% as anxious as that, but over 10 years, what effect does that have on me mentally and physically? And then, it's a whole symbiotic thing, isn't it? Your body affects your mind, and symbiotic's a big word, isn't it? Jesus, I'm starting to sound like my friend. But yeah, no, I think that whole idea of taking a break is useful. I mean, I had quite a difficult kind of Christmas. I won't go into it, but like difficult Christmas period for sort of a couple of reasons, and I was in this weird place where, like, I wanted to take a break from music and that, but equally I just wanted to crack on with life. I just wanted to, and there was this weird sort of split in my head where, like, I felt like I needed the time off to just relax and just see friends and just like be away from everything. But then I also wanted to just sit down, like get up early, play the guitar, do all the things I want to do. And I look back on that period, I think I did it exactly as I should have done. I just took a break as long as I needed to, and I went back to Surrey, where I used to live, spent loads of time with friends, then I did family Christmas, then I saw some friends for New Year's, and since New Year's, it feels a bit like a New Year's resolution, but I've been doing a lot of stuff. I've been just basically back on the horse, doing everything I want to do, and I think without that break, I might right now feel very stressed and burnt out, so I know that. So I'm sort of turning this all on me here, but
no, it's interesting. It's good to hear as well. Talk.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Yeah, and it's it's yeah. And I feel like that break, I wouldn't change how I did any of that necessarily. Like, I remember I did bring an acoustic guitar because I thought, like, wow, because I just booked a hotel room for like four nights, and I stayed with a friend on the first night, down in Surrey where I used to live, and I bought my acoustic guitar because I thought, well, what I'll do is I get up in the morning and I'll do a few hours on the guitar just so I feel like I'm doing it. And I didn't play any when I was there. I think I'd maybe play some chords, but I didn't actually practice at all or write or anything. But I don't regret that because I just don't think that's what my brain needed or wanted in the moment. So I'd get up pretty late. I'd go into the town for a coffee and just chill. And I'd see some friends, or I'd drive around. I went to Anderton's. Had a look around there, played some expensive guitars that I was never going to buy. And I just did all the things I think my brain just needed in the moment. And and I wouldn't change that. And I think sometimes if you're feeling burnt out, you've just got to you've got to realize where that tipping point is of, okay, I am not going to do anything productive now. Like, I think there's a balance. You've got to have that mental resilience sometimes to push through, but it's also knowing where your line is, where you go, no, hang on, I'm clocking out for a few days and I'm just going to, I'm still finding where that balance is, I don't know if you found that kind of line yet of where you need to just stop for a minute.
I don't think I've found it, but I've definitely got more attuned to when I can, when it starts to go into the red, so to speak. And my dad was a professional racing cyclist from a very young age, and he did quite a number of races, did very well in his career. And he would do his analogy of leaving miles on the road, which was, they train, they do hundreds of miles a day, but they'd leave some miles on the road for the next day. That was the kind of analogy, that you kind of get to that point and then you leave it just before you get to that point, so that you've got the excitement. And another analogy, I think Guthrie Govan said this, and I'm paraphrasing him, but he said, someone asked him if he warmed up before his shows, which I think warming up is good. But I think they were saying, do you play for a long time before a show? And his words were something to the effect of, no, I want to be excited when I see the guitar. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, and the miles on the road of just learning about your kind of what's the word? Parameters of how far you can go before you burn out, and then seeing that ahead. And that's where the learning about your mind and how you feel. I often tell students when you pick up the guitar, like, it sounds really cheesy, sounds like a kind of karate movie or something, but how do you feel? Actually, how does your body feel? Like, do you feel anxious? Are you breathing? And it's not to change that, but it's just to acknowledge that, because that might affect how you go into your playing. It's also that thing of like, am I learning this because I'm scared and inadequate, or am I doing this because often when we're curious, we just dive into stuff. We don't even need an excuse to practice. We just pick up the guitar and we start doing. That's the best place to be. Sometimes we need that kick out of bed to do it, but it's when you're like, I just don't want to pick it up. There's just that kind of thing where that's a sign right there. Okay, well, why don't I want to pick it up? Is it because of fear? Is it because I'm just genuinely, I didn't get much sleep, I'm tired, and I don't need to really play today? Maybe that's the best thing to do for my playing today, is not play. I'm not saying, obviously, the more you play, the better we get, of course. That's clear. But in terms of what we're talking about here, mindset and burnout and finding that balance, definitely leave some miles on the road, as my dad said.
Yeah, I was chatting to Yogev Gabe from... He's got a YouTube channel where you might have seen it. He does all these breakdowns of like complex time, like polyrhythmic songs. Does a lot of Meshuggah stuff, and like
cool.
He does these like quite cartoonish like drawings, and he basically, even if you're not a musician, you could understand how the rhythms work together and stuff. It's very cool and educational, but like interesting. And he's an incredible drummer as well. And he was saying there's someone that he follows that I can't remember. This is the second podcast in a row actually now where I've referenced someone and I've not remembered the name of the person that I'm talking about, which I feel a bit bad about. But he referenced a drummer who said that he'd drum for 5 days a week and then he'd have 2 days off, and he just wouldn't. And that to a lot of musicians, like, what? You have like you just stop for 2 days? Yeah, like just why not? I think that's potentially could be a good way to do things. Just build a schedule like that. I think for me, what I always try and do is just pick it up for like 2 minutes, if nothing else. If I've got a million other things on, because it's just building that habit of just picking it up. Like even if I'm not maybe feeling it, I do try and just pick it up and like play some scales or something, or just like jam for 5 minutes and then just go, okay, that'll do. Like that's for the sake of today when I'm not in the right place. That's I've picked it up now.
That's an equal thing as well. I think if you're having like a bit of a downtime with guitar playing and think, I just don't want to play, having a kind of little routine that you can do just to keep chops up. It's just like going to the gym. You go into the gym, you pick up the weights, you leave the gym, you don't take the weights with you, you just do the work, you leave, and it kind of reinforces that habit, keeps the fingers going, but you're just doing this practice for the sake of practice. Because I think sometimes, especially with younger players, it's a gung-ho kind of like, I'm going to go in and this practice session, I'm going to become enlightened on guitar. I'm going to get everything. I'm going to suddenly just be able to play like Tim Henson. I know that's an extreme example, an extreme analogy there, but I think subconsciously that attitude can be there. Like, this practice has to be the best practice. I need to be smashing it. But sometimes just doing, spinning the wheels is good enough, especially when you're having those times of feeling a bit uninspired. When I've come back from holidays now, or when I've taken vacation from my guitar playing in general, I often find when I come back I'm more inspired. I might not be playing as well, my bending might be a bit iffy, but I'm playing things, I'm coming up with new ideas, because I've taken a break from those habitual patterns of ideas that I was repeating subconsciously before. So then it gives me an opportunity to do something new as well. So habits can be good creatively. Breaks can be good creatively as well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well, I mean, so we've covered quite a lot of stuff, but there's one more thing. I was kind of going back to something we talked about earlier. I was interested because I had a very brief sort of flick through your conversation with Paul Gilbert. And he's obviously got lots of interesting things to say, and just a charismatic figure as he is. But I just wanted to see what your take was on him, and like, as what you took from your conversation with him.
Well, it comes back to, I've been a big fan of Paul Gilbert. Who doesn't admire Paul Gilbert to some extent? But my partner would say that I'm obsessed with him, and I have been obsessed with him, and I've soaked up his influence in my playing in many different ways, and followed him throughout the years. And the first thing I'd say is that he's still excited, or at least seems it, about guitar, and he's in his 50s, still playing, still exploring guitar on his terms. Paul's often seen as kind of a quirky individual because he's often, after the interview, he sent me a link to a Britney Spears song because of the chorus chords. I think he's just excited about stuff. He's just excited about great writing and stuff like that. So he's got that kind of like childlike curiosity, which I think that's like the elixir of everlasting life, I think, for musicians, is curiosity. I think life in general. As soon as you think you know everything, you're done. What is it to be like a child again, where everything, even the sight of blue paper, is exciting? And I get that kind of energy from Paul, where it's just like, what's going to happen? And the curiosity, I think also just he didn't say it in this way, but he was talking about writing, and when things feel difficult, just take a break. That's the other side, the kindness thing, and the reality check of actually what we're doing here. We're playing music. Well, the word there is play. What does that mean to play? What does it mean to actually explore, rather than do this academic exercise, and this is this scale over this chord, and it's this subdivision, and it has to be this way. What's actually playing? Like the guitar, especially when you've been playing for many years, becomes this geometric grid, and the barriers start to become this, solid thing. But actually, to play with a guitar, it's just string and wood, and we're playing it this way. But what if you do something different? What can you change? I think I heard you talking, I've forgotten his name. Was it the guitarist from Ginger? I I think you shared a quote from him. He said,
"Oh, so this it was Omer who actually, I don't know if the guitarist from Ginger still plays his guitars, but he's a luthier actually. I think I know what you're referring to. Yeah.
I think it said Ginger on the thing.
Yeah, he used to make the guitars for Roman, I believe it is. Who plays in.
Oh, I see. Sorry, my bad.
I know.
I'm uneducated there. But he was talking about, if you draw really good at drawing with your right hand, try drawing with your left. Little thing, and that's just that aspect brings out it just changes one thing, which gives you a different thing. So from my conversation with Paul Gilbert, he was talking about how he was playing drums, how he was playing slide, how he was singing melodies, how he was trying different gear to get different things. So there's a playfulness, and I know myself that I had all my, especially in my going back 10 years, I had my presets all saved and my guitars were all set up the same and everything had to be the same and I had to warm up the same and everything had to be perfect. Then I'd get to a gig, out in the expectations blown, and go straight back to the start of this conversation. It's because I had such a stiff idea and parameter of what I could do with what I got that it made me unable to express and play. So I think actually changing things up, keeping it fresh, not having a fixed idea of who you are, what kind of player you are, what you think it should be, because there's no future. The future is created by what you're doing now and how you think now. You're kind of, whatever you do now is kind of putting forward, 90 days time, am I going to be a better or worse player based upon what I do today? And that's not just what you do physically, that's your mental attitude. Very important, because that's where it happens. The playing can happen. I'm not worried about muscle memory and knowledge. I'm worried about how can I keep this interesting. And I think that's what Paul kind of imparted quite well in that conversation, in his own unique way, I think.
Yeah, he's got his own sort of quirky ways of talking about things. And I saw him at a guitar clinic years ago now in Birmingham. I just loved his energy, just his and like you said, I know you're certainly not making up when you're talking about his sort of childlike enthusiasm for the instrument, because I can definitely see it. It's like little things. That video of him shredding on the cello. Is it a cello or double bass or some sort of
yeah
through the Marshall amp? It's just amazing that he's seeing someone do that, because like, why not? So yeah, I think it's a good place to end it as well, because it's that kind of, it's a good note to end it on, that kind of childlike, and we're talking about curiosity, right? Like that kind of learning through curiosity, which I think is what Paul, maybe he's not done every day he's picked the guitar up, but I think that's something that I would imagine he is more inclined towards, and I think it's that was a big takeaway when through the conversation we've had. That really struck me. You have those moments where you talk to people and you suddenly sort of disappear for a minute because they say something, you go, oh yeah, and you kind of, and then they say some more stuff, but you're still on the thing they said, at the beginning of the sort of sentence. So that was, I thought that was really interesting. So if that's cool with you,
well, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, let's get the question for the next guest to open their conversation.
I don't know how to word this, but I think it goes with the conversation we've had. And I'd like to ask them how they keep their curiosity, how do they keep it fresh for them and their craft, whatever they do.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. How to keep the curiosity. That's a good one. Yeah, because if there's been variations. It's interesting because there's been variations on the sort of how do you keep going, basically, but everyone's got different like niches of like what are you like. It's not just about keeping going. For different people there's different things, and obviously curiosity is a big part of that, so that's an interesting one. And then if you've got an artist today, you said you were sort of pondering this, I'm going to put you on the spot and get you to pick one now.
It has to be one, doesn't it?
Huh?
Does it have to be one? Because I've got,
keep it at one, otherwise I'd be tagging away and it just dilutes the
yeah, well, this artist doesn't need any particular promotion, because I think a lot of people know who this is, but he's got a new album out, and I think I think it deserves some love. And that's Lewis Cole from Noah. He's a drummer. I don't know if
I'm not actually familiar, so
he's a drummer. Have you seen Clowncore?
I have, yeah.
He's the drummer.
Oh, right, man. I remember watching that thinking, like, these guys are really talented, and why are they in a portaloo making ridiculous noises?
He's a really quirky musician. I love his attitude around music. He records his first album. He said he recorded all his drums into a laptop microphone, and he mixed it. And it's just really, he's incredible chops. But it's just playful music. He kind of quotes Mario Kart as one of his inspirations for music, and he plays a very basic synthesizer sounds, synchronized stuff. If you've heard Clowncore, you'll kind of know what Lewis Cole's about. He's also got this kind of Beach Boys element to his voice, and these beautiful chords and harmonies, vocal harmonies. He stacks all these things, and it's just really silly. It doesn't take itself too seriously at all, which I think is really important. I heard Jack Gardner talking about that with the fusion thing, and that's another bit of advice I'd say is don't take it so seriously. It's not serious at all, and in fact, life is too serious to take seriously. So just go with it. And Lewis Cole kind of has that energy right there. So he's got a new album. I've forgotten the name of it, but you'll find it if you search Lewis Cole. I think he's got loads of stuff. Check it out.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's so funny. I didn't. I suppose I'd never pursued the, as brilliant as Clowncore is, I'd never gone down the rabbit hole of what the actual musicians do or who they are. So, so I guess that's a cool pick. Is there anything you want to kind of plug or share with the world in particular?
Well, I was just honoured to be here, Joe. I really appreciate your time.
No, it's a pleasure.
The list of guests you've had on this podcast are amazing. Lots of people I look up to, and it's a great podcast that you're doing. You're having really interesting conversations, and I hope that even if one thing is slightly helpful to somebody in this particular conversation, that's a huge honour. I'm busy at the moment I'm constantly doing things for certain pedal companies. I can't say much, but I'm doing stuff with them. I've got my band Mask of Judas, which is a progressive metal band, 8-string guitars. We've got an album out many years ago called The Mesmerists, so if anyone wants to listen to that, it's always helpful. We're writing new stuff, but we're currently, we're one of those bands that does things when the time is right for us, and that because we want to make the best stuff. So we're just currently very busy. So once the time comes together, we've got demos and things working. I'm also working on a project with a Finnish guitarist called Mr. Fastfinger, Mika Taiska. We're doing a little thing. I don't know. I can't really say much about that now. We're just kind of throwing ideas around.
Whoa. Sorry, I interrupted your personal plug with my sneezing.
And I'm just gigging. I'm doing a lot of playing, session-y stuff from home, teaching. I Lick Library, of course. If anyone wants to learn guitar, go to licklibrary.com. They've kind of revamped over the last few years. There's hundreds of new lessons, really good, really well suited to sort of beginner intermediate players. But I've also done, the last year I've learned Pornograffiti by Extreme, Eat 'Em and Smile by David Lee Roth. I did Van Halen 2, Van Halen 5150. There's a list that I've done. I've learned an album every month and taught it for Lick Library. So check it out. There's loads of new stuff there, and there's loads of new tutors there as well, which are worth checking out too. It's completely different than how it was 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I did have a look on the website sort of before, just see a bit more about the stuff you do. And there's also some really cool. I've always seen Lick Library pop up over the years, but I had a look and there's some really cool artists on there. So yeah, I second that. So but yeah, I mean, thank you for chatting. I've really enjoyed it.
Appreciate your time, Joe. It's been great.